welcome to all of you to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Dr. Patrick Oates, and I'm a proud member of the Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation Board of Directors. And I'm delighted to be with you this evening and to welcome you all here tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all our guest this evening, an award-winning children's illustrator and a son of Philadelphia, Jerry Pinkney. He will be joining us tonight on what has been proclaimed today as Jerry Pinkney Day across our great city. This honor follows an unprecedented dual recognition of Pinkney's work from the American Library Association, the 2016 Coretta King Virginia Hamilton Award for Lifetime Achievement, and the 2016 Laura Ingalls Wilder Award. Jerry is one of the most beloved and celebrated artists in children's literature, having illustrated more than 100 books over his 5-decade career, and having received a litany of prestigious awards, including the 2010 Caldecott Medal for his picture book, The Lion and the Mouse. In awarding him the Lifetime Achievement Award, the Coretta Scott King Virginia Hamilton Award, the chair praised Jerry for his insight, his remarkable skill, and distinctive style. Through the visual life of his illustrations, Jerry Pinkney has created a vast and broad legacy for child and adult audiences alike. Philadelphia couldn't agree more, as Mr. Pinkney grew up in our very own Germantown. The city is always eager to welcome him home. His talk tonight will be in conversation with our beloved Lorene Cary, a friend of the Free Library and the director of the SafeKidsStories.com, which has published Pinkney's personal narrative about how drawing provided him a child-safe place. Lorene is also the founder of Art Sanctuary, as well as a writing professor at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of Black Ice and the inaugural One Philadelphia selection, The Price of a Child. We are so very pleased this evening to welcome Jerry and his lovely wife, who I had the opportunity to dine with this evening, Gloria. Gloria is with us as well, and I'd like for you all to receive Jerry Pinkney, our guest, and Lorene Cary at this time. Thank you.
When you were at Dobbins,
Right.
which was a Votech school at the time,
Right.
you were head of the jazz club.
Yes.
All right.
Right.
And how did it happen that the Philadelphia School District allowed you and a bunch of kids from Dobbins to go out to jazz clubs at night together?
You know, that's a very cool question, and it really speaks to the times, and it speaks to Dobbins. I mean, they had this way of extending their education day, and as much as there were opportunities in the evening. And again, with the jazz club, we were able to get into clubs. We couldn't order anything to drink, and we tended to have to sit in the back. And how that really came about, I don't know, but we also, interesting enough, I was drawing from the nude body life drawing classes on South Street after school. And that was what we did, so it had this sense of that broad reach, and they thought it was important, and they made it happen. So as a kid growing up and in high school, being introduced to jazz, not only through records, but through the opportunity to sit in a room, and also made you feel very adult, and hear music and hear really big names, was pretty powerful. And drawing from the nude model was also pretty cool too in high school. But it was that experience, and it's interesting because it was a kind of a world kind of experience. It broadened our knowledge of how things work. Sure. But the other piece to it, it was experiencing something, there in a room. When you listen to music, no matter how well the recording is, you get in that environment, that space, and you're one with the music. So, but how that came about was pretty special.
On the one of the other honors you've gotten this year is that you are the Norman Rockwell Museum's Artist Laureate,
Right. Mm-hmm.
which is just amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
There's nothing more American than Norman Rockwell.
Right. Right.
And while we as a country are fighting over what is American, this American that all of us say we love, but
Yeah.
what is it?
Yeah.
To have you as the laureate of the
Yeah.
Norman Rockwell Museum
Yeah.
just opens the world,
Yeah.
I think, for us and for young people. Now, on that Norman Rockwell Museum website, they have a beautiful digital tour
Yes.
of your work. Anybody can go to that site, and it's a lovely tour. You can send the link to people who couldn't come tonight. And they have a soundtrack
Yes.
that goes along with your music.
Right.
Goes along with your painting,
Yeah.
sorry. How did they choose that music?
Well, it was very interesting. Stephanie Plunkett is the curator, and we've known each other, and she comes to visit oftentimes, and we discuss ideas, and then when she's curated exhibitions, she's there to pick out objects. And when we were having a conversation, she said, and when I'm here visiting, you're always playing music, different genres of music. And she suggested that we do this soundtrack. Then I thought that, wow, wouldn't it be kind of cool if, in fact, if I paired up, it had to be music that I listened to in my studio with one of the books in the exhibition. So that, and that gave rise to this search to make those connections. And, couple I talk about often because it's a great example, and most of us know the work, is Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Are Watching God. And I chose Miles Davis playing My Man's Gone. Yeah, and for The Ugly Duckling, Sarah Vaughan singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So we went through that process. I went through that process, and I can't tell you how rewarding it was for me to be able to dig back into the music. And some of it was records, Ricky Tikki Tavi and Ravi Shankar. I mean, that process would pop into mind. I would look at a title and think about the music, and it would take me back to that place, and that's how that. The Grasshopper and the Ants, Chick Corea and Bella Fleck. I mean, it's so wonderful. I mean, and so and it went on like that. So it's classical, it's folk music, and whatnot. But and it truly is the music. If I always say that, if you come and visit me in the studio and there's no music, you know I'm in trouble. Yeah.
We have, although we were not able to keep all of the instruments ready to go, we did ask the keyboardists to stay and keep this keyboards up because Emmy Ascaros has been working on Over the Rainbow. And maybe you'll come up and play it for us now. Would you do that?
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Emmy's mother is here,
Yeah. Yeah. So
and we'd love to hear it.
yeah, close your eyes and think about
How-
the ugly duckling. Yeah.
I love that. Tell us a little bit. Emmy's getting ready and getting her
Yeah.
stuff together. How old is this child? 15
Wow,
years old.
yeah.
We're delighted. And why that pairing?
I mean, I think there's somewhere over the rainbow is that sort of this dream of what you want to achieve or be. And you think about the heart of the ugly duckling, always wanting and not looking at, himself or herself. But it's just, and interesting because sometimes you make this connection, it's just a kind of a feeling that it seems to work in that case. But that I saw the ugly duckling looking somewhere over that rainbow.
I see.
Yeah. good pairing, right? Yeah. That's good pairing.
Thank you again, Emmy
Yeah.
Escaros, for sharing that with us from the Kimmel Youth Jazz Band. Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Somehow, because we were starting in the music, I want to move toward. It's a beautiful way into the way we perceive things, the way we take in the world, the way we show the world back, the way how you create. You have on your website a whole section on learning difference,
Right.
and you wrote in the blog for Safe Kids Stories about being dyslexic before you had a word for it.
Right. Right.
Tell us something about how you experience that learning difference, or how you experienced it as a child,
Yeah.
and what part it played in your art, or what part the art played in your learning.
Okay. I mean, I think one of the things that, for me, that was incredibly important, because I was never diagnosed with being dyslexic. No one had a word for it or anything in any way of knowing how to deal with it. So I didn't know that I knew something wasn't quite right. I didn't know how to identify it. One of the things that was kind of interesting about that early years for me, and I take pride in saying this, especially for my parents and my family, my siblings, unlike people who have these challenges, I didn't grow up with the sense that I had to be ashamed of it. I did well with hiding it, but I was never laughed at. I've been on many panels when we talk we're in the panel as learning disabilities, especially dyslexia, and they will all talk about being teased. I was really never teased. So in some sense, there was a kind of a balance between knowing that there was something not quite right, and knowing I didn't want to be in that place. But at least I didn't have it echoed back to me that there was some deficiency there. I'm also, what I think about a lot is the fact that knowing that, and I found ways to get around it in a way that allowed me in some cases to excel, but in other cases not so. But I learned to live with it, and in terms of the work itself, there's no question that someone that's maybe a high achiever who wants that sort of self-esteem, that balance, will find that area where there is a strength and lean on it. And so that's what I did. And it's interesting enough, that gives you sort of a bridge to the kind of self-esteem and being a high achiever. But the other piece, which we can't identify yet, is how it would affect the art, the physical object that I create.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that it does, So I can say it now that this shortcoming, or this inability to understand certain things, made me see the world differently. It made me especially see this two-dimensional work differently. It took me a while to get to the point to value it, because I was trying to work my way around it and out of it. But there was a certain point where people when I began to talk about the learning disability, began to think about my work and feed it back to me that, hey, you know what? This sense of not quite understanding perspective, there was a kind of a personal way that I approached things and saw things, and that had value. So that came, and now I must admit, I must have been incredibly clever. I was never ever in the seat, and I can't figure out when my turn came to read. Now, I had my own fire drills and stuff like that. But and I did that, and And then later on, and I think there's the other piece too, which is this about these 2 days of celebration. Teachers who really understood me and knew that there was a kid who really wanted to learn, they were always there for me. You know, it was, the challenge was when teachers didn't have the time or didn't quite understand. So I ended up in special classes, but they really weren't addressing any that particular need. It was just a holding pen. Yeah.
Right.
Also, I'm very ingratiating. I knew that part of my personality knew that if I was as I say to, I was never, ever a poor student. I was always a very good student because I was trying to learn and I didn't mess up at all, So I knew that I needed the teachers. I needed support.
And you knew that you didn't have the room to say,
No. Yeah.
Yeah. like,
Yeah, right.
sorry for the podcast, something bad.
Okay.
I'm trying not
Yeah, right.
to make a bad movement there, but
Okay.
you weren't allowed to do that, in other
No,
words,
no,
right?
right, yeah.
You know what, last week, I think it was, yes, last week, I went to a summer school class and did one of the latest of several, what we now call Pinkney workshops.
Right.
I've got a bunch of them. Anytime, anybody want a Pinkney workshop, I can do one for you at any moment, anywhere. But in this case, it was simply reading a book. So I grabbed The Grasshopper and the Ants. I hadn't read it before. It wasn't in my Pinkney repertoire. It was just that they were sold out of everything else. So I grabbed it.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful fold up,
Yes.
right? Instead of a fold out like the bunnies or something, we had although he has, bunnies, but not that kind of, it was a fold up. And on the bottom, now we've watched The Grasshopper, who is
Yeah.
such a fun guy, such a party character.
Yeah.
And then underneath, and on the top, it's all white and cold and desolate. And this grasshopper who has a banjo, and he's been happy all the time, and he's been doing, he looks like hypothermia. He looks dazed. It's not going to be long.
Right.
And then there's in the back, there's a picture with these yellows and browns.
Yes.
Where you can see there's a door. Underneath there's a two-page fold spread
Yeah.
with all the ant activity. It is brimming with warmth. There's a Franklin stove. There are little nurseries with blankets.
Yes.
They're wearing little acorn caps.
Yeah.
It was so intricate that we had to stop there. And the young woman who was with me, our Safe Kids intern, Claire, went around and showed it to the children and then it occurred to me, because I've been thinking about you and reading, it occurred to me that the children had to read the picture.
Yeah.
And that's when you said, I'm not sure what the dyslexia has done to the art, I thought he made a picture that you have to read.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That's what you have to
right.
do.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, and it probably the workings of the mind is that playing that out is the text. The text is the art. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and there were no words
No.
on that, but that took the longest time for us because you had to stop and read it.
Yeah.
How'd you get the chutzpah to change the folktale?
I
You
think-
know what happens in Grasshopper and the Ants,
Yeah.
everybody, right?
Well, it just sort of
It
ends
doesn't happen.
on page 38, I think. But in my book, it goes on. I kind of felt that, those Aesop's fables or the Grimm's, they were really kind of cautionary tales, and then some of them really were for adults as well as children. And I think at that particular time, that was certainly important. I mean, I think we live in a time when kids live their lives out kind of a sense of caution, if we talk about that. Their lives are surrounded by kind of threats, you know. And my work is to talk about, not sidestep that, but to bring that into the story. That's there. But there's a redemptive piece to it. And that's it's part of my personality, is what I want for my children, is what I want for the children that I speak to, is that no matter, you know, how challenging the situation is, and that you can learn, you know, you can learn that part of it. But there is this sense of redemption and hope, and that things can turn around. That's the big thing, that things can turn around. So in so many ways, that's what I've been doing. Now, I just finished the Three Billy Goats Gruff, and that ends, whoa.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you how this one, but it flips, and it also leaves the reader with this sense that, hey, I wonder how this is going to not only turn out, but how does it continue? And so I keep it open that way. And that's, when you're into that space and you have that message, then you simply live it out. And if you're fortunate to have editors and publishers who are willing to go on the journey with you, then that can happen. And in the beginning, there was some questions that maybe Pinkney was softening up things a little bit. But at the same time, I think we are in that space where that sense of that arc of hope and possibility and redemption, and a turnaround, that we can all sort of turn around, do things, get things right.
Well, I tell you, it affected me and the children so much that I had to write about it.
Oh.
So the art made me do a piece about that
I'd love
particular
that.
moment.
Yeah.
Let me also ask you, now that we've gone sort of there, we've done the redemption side,
Yeah.
right? One of the things you wrote in the blog about was, you know, a lot of kids find their parents' pornography and pinch it and go read it under the bed. What you found were their life magazines with photos of World War II. And there are ways in which violence is pornography.
Yes.
For sure. And you write as a grown man, these many years later, about those images as if you were still seeing those images today. What was the effect? Why did you need to see them? Not every child would have taken that Life magazine. Why did you need to, and what did it do to your imagination?
That's a good question. There was two pieces to it, and one was I plainly understood there was something that my parents didn't want me to see.
Okay.
And that could have been the kind of impetus to sort of find myself searching and finding them. The other piece, of course, one of the reasons why those images have stayed with me, not only was it the power of the images and what they were saying to me as a young child, but I didn't have anybody to explain to me what they were about. And so in so many ways, I without that explanation, they were part of my being at the time. You remember there were air raid drills in schools and things like that. So that was part of it. I never wanted my parents to know that I saw those images, because I kind of understood that they were trying to protect us from that piece. And maybe I think sometimes all of those pieces come together and they're somewhat unresolved in many ways. And I think especially as you grow older, you have those images and then you see them again in our time. In different formats, and I think that is. But it's also it didn't give me a sense of empathy or in that way, but it made me want to resolve things to make things better. Maybe in some ways, am I still trying to erase those images? I don't know.
It's It's something we all think about. I think
Yeah.
all of us are thinking about it all the time.
Right.
Now, when it's not just photographs, but also videos.
The video, right, I guess.
And
Yeah, exactly.
the regularity with which our young people are watching violence. It just makes me ask everybody I know, what did it do to you? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's a form of education in a way, too, as well.
Jesus.
About, the horror that can be upon us.
You have done lots of historical
Yes.
interpretation, not only in books, but for the National Park Service. And I think most widely available with Black Heritage stamps.
Yes.
One of the things that our Jane Golden here always says about murals on walls is that it's art everybody can see.
Yeah.
Anybody can see. You can't help but see it because it's
Right.
there
Yeah.
at the stop sign. This is art that we put on little envelopes.
Yeah.
And this will be my last question before we open it to the group. There's every time you work on this, it's form and content,
Yes.
right? Any kind of art,
Yes,
you're
right.
forming your content. There are difficulties in interpreting history visually. There must be difficulties in interpreting that history in such miniature.
Right.
And there must be formal difficulties
Yes.
in doing a lot in a small space and knowing that you're not going to be painting each one of these, that they're going to be, reproduced. And maybe sometimes the red will go too far. What's hard about doing stamps?
Well, you kind of hit on it. It's the scale. And I think that at the time that I was doing stamps, the educational component was important. So we had to the artist had to find some way of identifying why that person deserved to be on the stamp. What was the history? How did they get to that point where we wanted to honor them? So that was the challenge, and especially was the challenge for me because for me, it's always important that I engage in something that challenges me as an artist. I hadn't done portraiture, not really. And if I did, they were large drawings. So that challenge for me was to be able to do a portrait, to have something along with that portrait that clearly and quickly spoke to what identified the importance of that person. And I actually see myself growing from the Harriet Tubman and especially the Jackie Robinson, and what I always say, and especially when I'm talking to students, that you look at my work and the idea is that you see that growth. So for me, it's if miniature portraiture is a challenge for me, then I would run towards that challenge. It has some drawbacks, but it's usually what at the end of all of that, I know I'm a better artist, and in so many ways, a better person, because I use that project and those projects as an opportunity to grow. That's clearly what it's about. At the end, it's got to be about growth. My job is to interpret and to deliver visual images. But I have to feel that I'm a little bit more. It's a little bit more than just a hand that I can. I could talk about the history, or I could better understand poetry, or I could better understand the value of a cautionary tale. It's got to be part of it. Part of me.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Don't you think it would be a good idea to tell people how hard you work and how long you work, what kind of hours, how dedicated you are to what you do?
The questioner here
Yeah.
actually knows very well how hard and how long. This is Gloria Jean
Yeah,
Pinkney.
yeah.
Would you stand up and
Yeah,
just
right, yeah.
turn around so people can see you? This is Jerry's wife and his sometime literary collaborator,
Yeah.
but life collaborator too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes artists will say, "I don't work. I play." Well, that's not with me. I work. And I work lots of hours. If I'm doing finished work, it's an easy 10 or 12-hour day. But it isn't to say that and lead you to believe that it's kind of a drudgery. I don't sit there and wait for the dials to go around. It is immersing myself into a project, and sometimes I don't want to let it go. I don't want to let it go because there's what you do is you build up a certain rhythm, and you want to sustain that interest. And for me, there are points when I can't stop because getting back into it requires another kind of time. You mentioned that a little bit about starting a new project. There's a weird kind of space, so I stay there, and I'm getting, by the way, a little better where I don't go over that curve where I'm not constructive, where I don't have to get up and redo what I stayed up late to do. But my work, I shouldn't say my work requires a lot of time. I commit myself to a lot of time. That's what it is. So, and there is that aspect that it is joyful when you're creating something and you're bringing something to life. That's a powerful and rich feeling that this is mine. I made this, and I think that also because I think as an illustrator, there's a part of having a thick skin because that doesn't mean that the person on the other end is going to like or accept what you've done. But if you, in fact, you believe that you've done the best you could and you committed yourself, then it's okay because then it's not that they don't like it, it's that they have another opinion about the work that I've created. Yeah.
Do you fix things? Do you change them? Are you?
It's interesting that there's no false starts for me. In other words, I will commit myself and I'll work my way through something if it doesn't seem to be going the way I had hoped. But I've built in, this is just how I see it, that, okay, you're learning something. I always wanted my work also, I wanted you to enter into the work realizing that the artist, there were many aspects to the work itself, and some of it was struggle. Not that you had to, that's not telegraphed, but the working out of things like that if it doesn't go my way and I have to turn another corner, it's part of my art itself, and that's also part of that learning about things. So it isn't going that way. How can I make it go that way? And not only that if you approach it that way, you can oftentimes, often, not always, do more and more creative work because you didn't expect it to happen.
Right. Yes.
And you're responding to that. And sometimes that's when you get original work. Yeah.
I've been told that it's foolish to pursue a career in the arts because there's often no future in it. What do you have to say to young artists like myself?
Well, one of the things that's expansive about the arts is that you create yours. You want to do this. You want to create your space. In other words, your space doesn't exist now. You're working towards filling that space. And as long as you're doing that, you're adding to this canon of artwork. But that's it. You're going to make your own space. And I've heard you play twice today, and you'll be there. You're fine. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah, that's a question somebody should ask you about it because you're there. Yeah.
In fact, one of the things in the blog you were very clear about was that your own father.
Yeah.
Not only did some of the teachers, but your own father was unable to see the potential for a life in this art.
Years ago, I read your book, The Price of a Child, and just the visual style of your writing took me back to that era of slavery, trying to escape slavery. And I just read your book. You illustrated a Hans Christian Andersen novel in which the girl died at the end.
Oh, yes.
So you deal with tough subjects.
Yeah.
But do you ever see yourselves working together? I mean, as two really renowned artists here in the area, do you see writing so he can illustrate?
Wow, that's a great
Yeah, I
idea.
know. Yeah, but you don't get 25%. Don't get, yeah, you know. We got to clear that up right now, right?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I know.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We should think about it.
Yes, with your reputation, I'm sure there are a lot of writers who come to you, and I have this story, and I'd love to have Pinkney illustrated. Are there actually stories that you pursue that you would like to illustrate? And is there ever a time when the illustrations come before the story? In other words, you get ideas in your head and you start drawing these things and decide if you want to put these in a story, or maybe eventually a story comes along that you can put them in, but do the illustrations ever come before the story?
That's a good question. Let me answer the first one about people, coming to me and then initiating projects. Let's stay with that. And with the Legend of John Henry, that was a story that I grew up with, of course, and fired up my imagination as a young child. And at that point, I saw it. I mean, I remember, I don't remember the first time whether it was a ballad or I was told, but certainly the story was not read to me. I'm going to say kind of follow up, and I don't know if I'm backtracking or not, but when I was a kid growing up, when even my mother reading Hans Christian Andersen, they were in a collection with very few illustrations. If they were black and white. I saw those characters in many ways. And so with the Legend of John Henry, he was part of me, part of my makeup. And I attempted to actually reimagine it. And at that time, I felt intimidated by other writers, and I didn't. We invited Julius Lester to write the text. And Julius, it wasn't a favorite of his childhood, and we had a conversation. This hopefully leads into, and when I talked about John Henry as I saw John Henry as a kid and what he meant to me, Julius said, I get it, I get it. Now, in the case of pictures coming first and then the text coming later, with The Lion and the Mouse, the idea, I did the storyboard, and I never do it like a storyboard, but in that case I did. I was on the way back from a trip, and I did it on the plane. The idea was that the images was there, and I was just going to add text later, only to do this storyboard and realize it had the potential that it didn't need the text. Now, I don't know if this is part of the question, but I'm making it part of your question, and that is that I'm working on a memoir now, and I'm attempting to write it. I have not written an original story where I came up with the concept, but that is in the future for me. One of the things that's so powerful about what I do and my interest and passion in it is that I can still see possibilities for myself. So that's the next possibility. And what I do is I inch towards a kind of a goal, so that's where I'm at
I have two questions, actually. The first is really short. What instrument did you play?
It was like a weird E-flat alto. Nobody even knows. It was like I wanted to be Miles Davis. I wanted to play a trumpet. But every kid wanted to be a trumpet. And a lot of the other students were faster than I was to getting to the table to get the trumpet. So my head, it was in like an octave lower than a trumpet. It had a weird shape. It was really hard running away from kids who were chasing you. And I had this big thing, a music case. It kept knocking against my knees. But I was pretty good. I learned to read music and all that. Yeah.
And my second question is, do you work on one project at a time, or do you have several projects that you kind of go from one to the other?
Several in different stages. Usually when I'm doing the finish or the art that's going to be reproduced, that I stay with that. but I keep folders around, and in the process of maybe researching some other project, you come across things that will support another project. Now, as I mature as an artist, I'm beginning to sort of balance a little more projects. That way I don't face a project and all of a sudden it's there and I got to get it done. So, so sometimes if there's a break, I'll do a dummy book for it. That's a model for the book that may not be due for 2 years. And I'll do it and then I'll put it away so that when you start it, you go, oh, this feels good.
It's a pleasure. I know teaming with Jules Lester and Patty McKissick and my wonderful friend Bob Sansuzi.
Yes.
Was there anything different when you knew you were doing Dick Jackson's book?
Oh, well, explain. See,
Which is amazing.
Yeah, my new book, which comes out in September, is In Plain Sight she mentioned, Ellen Major is a bookstore owner and loves books. Dick Jackson has been around in the field as an editor and publisher for a long time. And I've always known him. I spent time with him in conferences, had high respect for him. And then he retired as a publisher and editor and started to write children's books. So there was a kind of interesting dance because I knew and respected him so well. But I also respect him well enough to know that I could say, Dick, if we moved this way or that way, it would make more visual excitement and whatnot. So that was a particularly challenging book for me because he was not only the writer, but he had a history of being the editor, and I was working with an editor, so it got kind of complicated. But in many ways, it always goes around for me is those kind of challenges make the book much more interesting because I'm working my way through all that, and that's energy. It's just it's energy.
I'd like to ask that who were your favorite illustrators when you were growing up, and what made them special to you?
You know, it was interesting because when I think back on it, and you know, I even through college, you know, there was this sense that I was looking at art in a very pragmatic way. We did not have like picture books as such at home. So if you asked me about that time, it was my favorite childhood. I can remember stories, but not physical books, you know. It was, and then there was that point where I knew that the narrative art was where I wanted to go, and there was some interest that I had in the fantastical first before the kind of realism, and also this sense of what the role animals play in storytelling. So at that point, that's where the interest. So it would be Arthur Rackham or Howard Pyle would come into my life and change it. So my book kind of collecting came as I began to center myself into books as a way of expressing myself. So, yeah.
It is a great pleasure to hear you again. I was part of the 2013 Arts Flash.
Oh.
And I became a kid again.
Oh.
One of the things that kind of prompted me to ask this question was in terms of all the reinterpretations of books, of stories. I'm in the era where the story of Little Black Sambo.
Right.
Okay. Never saw it in print. But your book, Sam and the Tiger.
Yeah.
Please tell us something about how you developed and your choice in terms of a realistic picture of Sam and the Tiger.
Wow, that was. Thank you for because I think it's an interesting question, and as much as it has a great story to it. You know, I remember Little Black Sambo as a kid growing up. and I remembered how I felt about that story. Here was a child of color that triumphs over the threatening tigers. It was many, many years later that we all in the 60s dealt with it, derogatory, and I began to understand the word Sambo. But the point was that if I could go back to those times, it was a story that I valued. It was important to me. So Gloria Jean and I, we were at the Charles Blockson collection at Temple. Had it come up before then? I don't know. And so Charles had a whole row rack of shelf. Librarians, help me out. It's a shelf in a library. Of Helen Bannerman's. There were other collections, another part of that series. And I thought, hey, man, like Charles Blockson, I mean, he's saying, these stories have some value. So, and I think Gloria kind of followed up with, maybe we should think, we should think about it. And then, so I thought about it and said, but I'm going to test the waters first. So at conferences, I would talk about the Uncle Remus tales and John Henry, and I would say, and the possibility of, Little Black Sambo, and I would say it, and room would go silent. So, and I would keep. It took me. I had a hard head, but I began to. So, then I'm sitting at home or in my studio, and I get a call from Julius Lester, and they're on this international kind of web. What do you call it? Chat room.
Yes.
And in Little Black Sambo is the subject, and somebody says, well, Jerry Pinkney is working on. Imagine it. So I get a call from Julius, and I said, I don't know if you guys know Julius Lester. Well, he's very direct, and not opinionated. He has a strong sense of what he thinks. And he says to me, and I said, oh man. He says, how can you do something like that without me? And I said, well, Julius, I'm not really working on it. I've been thinking about it and whatnot. And we had a conversation. And then he said, well, why don't we collaborate? We didn't tell anybody about it. And what I remember, he says, I'll have a text, I'll have a manuscript in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, and I couldn't sleep at night. I mean, I know this is not a good thing. 2 weeks ago, I got nothing, and my load getting lighter and lighter. Every week went by, I didn't get anything. I was a happier person. And then I got it, and I said, whoa, this is it. This is pretty powerful, and it's what it was doing how it had affected me as a child. It was starting to brew up inside of me. The 1920s was a great time. I mean, I collect a lot of books, and I have a lot of books, especially of photographs of African Americans getting dressed up and sitting still, because you had to sit still in front of a camera, and having their pictures taken. And I said, that's what I wanted to say with Sam. I wanted Sam and his parents to be proud, and upright. And and it grew out of all that. It grew out of the sense of what the story meant to me. My grandson, Leon, is the model, and that was just so rich to have him pose, and I've got outtakes that are just quite wonderful. So it was all that kind of stuff. And we never, with the editor, is Phyllis the publisher then? She was also the publisher at Dial. Not marketing, no one knew about it until the text was edited and the art was done, and she marched it into marketing and promotion, and they said yes. So that's how that happened.
Wow.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because what it does, it brings back, in a sense, as I said to one reporter, look, tigers turned into butter. As a fantastical story, and that was, so that's Sam.
I just wonder, what's the relationship between your work and sleep? Do you ever feel like if I go to sleep, I'm going to lose this, or do you tend to feel like if I sleep, it will come?
That's an interesting question
That's a
because
great question, yes.
Gloria keeps a notepad. I have this kind of thing. It's kind of quirky, but if I lay down, if I lie down,
Lie
lie down.
down. Lie
I
down,
did
yes.
correct myself. Remember that. I beat you to it. Ideas come to me. I mean, things, especially those ideas that get stuck somewhere along the way. And I know now I have a beautiful chair with that I can lay back on. And as soon as I do that, I tilt a certain angle back. Something opens up, I don't know, somewhere, and it come out. So when that happens, I don't have to jot it down or anything. I could tuck it away, have a good sleep, and wake up in the morning and pull it up, retrieve it. And it's just, and not only that, if I get up and I write it down, the spelling gets in the way. I mean, I can't see and I can't find my glasses, so I'm puzzled by this. What is this? So maybe, again, it's this idea is if I tuck it away that, I can retrieve it and I can use it. And usually it's useful. It isn't the kind of very useful if it happens in the middle of the night, but right as I lie down.
That's a great question. And it's a wonderful question to take us out with as we say night-night to each other.
Yeah.
There's upstairs after this.
I think so.
There's
Where's it?
some signing that will be able to happen.
Yeah.
Jerry Pinkney's books remain, the stamps remain, the exhibits continue. The Norman Rockwell online continues. But all of this work lives on in our lives, in our culture, in our imaginations.
Rena, I should mention the possibility of the Woodmere.
And
In January.
all right. I didn't know it was legit. We could say it.
I think they're putting the pressure on me, so I think
So
it's
going to
legit.
happen. Great, in January.
Right, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. For
You're
this
welcome.
conversation.
This has
Very
been
helpful.
terrific. Thank you. Thank you.